So this is Judy. This is our author, Dr. Judy Stone. And then we have people from joining in from Zoom from all different areas, like South Florida, and I think here. And yeah. So I want to welcome everybody again. And also in Zoom land, thank you for joining. Thank you so much for attending our author talk with Dr. Judy Stone. I hope you enjoyed the breakfast, the Hungarian Jewish recipes that the sisterhood made. Thank you to Nancy Miner and Esther and also Cindy for helping with that. I hope you also were able to read some of the descriptions of the vibrant Jewish community that existed in Hungary before the war. I think it's so important to celebrate that. We have a term in Judaism that I learned recently. It's called Masora, which means tradition. And that's the backbone of Judaism, passing on traditions from generation to generation. And I think that's why after catastrophes like the Holocaust and October 7th, that we're able to rebuild because we want to pass on those traditions and those stories. So, this program is hosted by Congregation B'nai Israel Sisterhood and also Teach the Shoah, which is an organization that I work for. We help people all over the world build the stories of the Holocaust and to teach them how to present them in engaging and historically accurate ways. So please take a flyer. It's outside in the social hall, and we have an upcoming program on May 12th that you can attend on Zoom. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Judy Stone. She's the author of Resilience, and she spent many years researching her family, traveled back to Hungary, put so much dedication into this book to honor the memory of her family. Before she starts, she's going to be sharing, doing some storytelling. I want you to start thinking about a little bit. There's this little activity. I have 2 activities that I want you to participate in. So in Teach the Shoah, in our community, when we tell stories, we give appreciations to the storyteller afterwards. Now, appreciations can exist in 3 ways. The first is delivery. So pay attention to specific parts of the story that connect with you, and you can appreciate that. The content. The second is delivery. How she told the story, her hand movements, her expression. You can appreciate that. And then the third is how it made you feel. You can talk about how it made you feel. So she's going to share a 10-minute story with you. And afterwards, I'd like you to give appreciations to her. If you're on Zoom, please share in the chat and we will try to read some of those. Okay, Judy, for you to share your story.
Thank you. I appreciate the invitation and the introduction, Jenna. And thank you to all of the sisterhood who I can't see, except those on Zoom. So I'm going to tell you a story about my cousin, Mari, who died last fall. She was 5 when this happened. And it's as background, so you understand how an American girl ended up under the Nazis, imprisoned under the Nazis. Her grandparents moved to the U.S. in 1894 to work with an uncle who had recruited them. And they had 2 children, Helen and Jerome, and they went back to Budapest in 1910. And the husband died while they were there. So Mari's grandmother decided to stay in Hungary with the rest of the relatives after her husband died. I'm going to tell her story in the first person, in how she shared it with me. In March 1944, I was turning 5 when the Germans invaded Hungary. First thing that we saw, we were all told to wear yellow stars, and then Jewish stores were vandalized, and there were book burnings. In May, we were sent to the ghetto. And sorry, technical difficulties.
We can still hear you and
Yeah,
see you.
no, that's fine. So in May, we were sent to the ghetto, and ghettos were the walled off part of the town, usually in the poorest section of town. People were crowded together, multiple families sharing an apartment. There was poor sanitation in that area. There was little food, and many people became ill, and some died. In May of that year, we were sent to the ghetto. Sorry, we didn't see young men in the ghetto because uh, they were in forced labor, munkasolgalat, and they were mostly sent to the Ukraine, where they worked digging ditches and building bridges. Some were sent ahead of the real Hungarian soldiers and used to detect landmines. In fact, Magdi's brother was blown up that way in the Ukraine. On June 21st, we were all moved to the Surly Brickyard. I later learned that there were 13,000 of us there. It was an open place and there was no shelter. It was hot and rainy, and we were just exposed to all of the elements. A week later, we were forced onto cattle cars bound for Auschwitz. Auschwitz was an extermination camp, and I say extermination because that's how they viewed the Jews, as little more than insects to be squashed and exterminated. There were 100 of us on each car, and there was no food and scant water. There was just a bucket in the corner of the train, of the cattle car, for pee and poop. You can imagine how bad it was, and that was the first time that I saw anyone who was dead. The train I later learned, was detoured and didn't go to Auschwitz because someone had blown up the railways to Auschwitz. So we were detoured and went to a town called Strasshof in near Vienna. I later learned that detour is what saved my life, because had I arrived at Auschwitz, all the little kids and old people were killed as soon as they arrived because we were considered useless eaters. After 4 or 5 days on the train, we arrived at Strasshof. That was a big transit camp. So that was used as a place to sort people and decide which work camp that they would go to. My father, who was a professional, he was a lawyer, and all the other well-educated men were sent to different camps where they were forced to do menial work and hard labor as a way to humiliate them as much as anything. In Strasshof, during the sorting, there were these large, it was noisy and loud and scary, and there were these large German shepherds. They were almost as big as I was, and I was really afraid of them. My mother and grandmother and I were sent to a different town than my father was. We were sent to a city called Lobau, which was where there were a lot of oil refineries. My mother, Helen, was put to work making bricks in a factory. And my grandmother, Ilonka, worked cleaning the officers' quarters because she was older, and I guess they were trying to be nice to her. She had it a little bit easier, and by working there, she was able to steal potato peelings for us, and that supplemented our diet, which was mostly leftovers from sugar beets that had been mashed. The head of the camp, I learned, wasn't as cruel as many were, and he liked kids. In fact, he gave us a half cup of milk each day, which was almost unheard of. And he let us play in the yard. Not that there was anything to play with, but he let us play outside while our parents worked. My grandmother asked him if he would please let my father come home because I missed him so much. And surprisingly, he agreed to that. So my father came back. When he arrived, we noticed that he was limping. He had a leg wound that was infected, where a soldier had struck him with a shovel and injured his shin, which became infected because he wasn't digging ditches fast enough. My mother cleaned old rags that she found and dressed his wound as best she could every day. While we were in Lobau, it seemed like we were being bombed every day by the Allies. I was a scrawny little kid, and I couldn't run very fast. So my father would hoist me up on his back and try to run with me from the barracks to the woods where there were foxholes. He couldn't run very fast either because he was fairly old. He was about 58 at that time, and he had that leg injury. He would grab a blanket from the barracks, and if we couldn't go fast enough and reach the foxholes, he'd throw us on the ground and try to cover us and hide us with the blanket. We'd still hear the bombs whiz as they went by, and we'd feel the earth shake as they hit nearby. We spent that winter in Lobau. On March 27th, they put us on another cattle car train again, this time to go to another bad camp, Bergen-Belsen. But this time, an Allied air raid struck the train, not just the track, and it killed all the people in the wagons 2 cars ahead of us. I heard screams of other people who were just as terrified as I was, and those who were hurt by the blasts. You could smell burning wood and burning flesh, and it was just awful. The force of the explosion was so intense that the rails twisted up, and bits of molten metal flew off and caught nearby wooden buildings on fire and other of the wagons on the train. I saw bloodied, injured people in the station and some who were dead. I was sitting on a knapsack by my grandmother's knees when this happened. I remember looking up at her and saying, Ilonkoneni, I'm so scared. What do we do? What's going to help us? And she looked down at me as she tried to comfort me and put her arm around me. And she said, let us pray. God hears the prayers of little children. And so we prayed, Ana Hashem Hoshia please God save us. The Germans let us off the train a little while later, but they wouldn't let us help the injured people laying on the platform. They simply took us back to the barracks. A few days later, the Russians came and liberated us. My mother became even more worried again, and I didn't understand what that was about, but I vividly remember her taking some soot and rubbing it on her face and her clothes to make herself look more unattractive. My father found a broken down wagon and a lame horse, and we set off towards home, which was a couple of 100 miles away. The horse died after 50 miles. And there was a farmer's wife who was really nice, and she let us stay in their barn for a couple of days. And I remember she fed me bread and butter, and I hadn't had anything that delicious for over a year. We arrived back home after having walked most of the way and hitched rides on some trains. We arrived back in Budapest on May 8th, 1945. That was my grandmother's birthday. Other people remember it because it was VE Day, Victory in Europe Day. We eventually found our way. We stayed in a Red Cross shelter in Budapest for a few days, and my father got them to contact my uncle Jerome, who was still in Little Falls, New York, and he was able to send us some money. That helped us get back to Debrecen, which was the town in eastern Hungary where we lived. One day I was sitting by the window in an apartment of a friend's. Our apartment had been taken over by strangers, and they wouldn't give us our apartment back, so we stayed with other people. One day I remember sitting in the apartment, and I looked out the window, and I was having my long hair, curly hair, put up in pigtails by my mother. And I glanced out the window and I cried, look, there's Magdalene, Aunt Magda. It's amazing that I recognized her, as Magdalene had been pregnant when I last saw her. And now she weighed about less than half of what she had before the war. My mother didn't believe me at first, but she did indeed look and saw that it was Magdi, and she went out and brought her back to the apartment. And she and my grandmother and Magdi sat around the kitchen table. And I sat quietly in the corner of the room playing while the women talked, so that they would ignore me and forget that I was there. Magdi talked about the horrors that had happened to her in the war. She talked about the gas chambers, and for years afterwards, I was too afraid to go to friends' houses if they had gas stoves in their houses. After the war, this was 1947 now, my mother went to the U.S. consulate because she, as you remember, was a U.S. citizen and was born in the U.S. and spent her early years there. She went to the U.S. consulate to try to get us back home. Voting was mandatory under the Russian communist rule in 1947. And the consulate had told her they were too busy when she went in September. They said, "We don't have time for you now. Come back in December." So during this period, there was an election, and my mother, Helen, knew that she had to vote, but she also knew that it was illegal to vote because she was a U.S. citizen. So she was really torn as to which way to go. So finally she said, "Aha, I know what to do." And she dropped a blank piece of paper into the ballot box. And she went back, when she went back to the consulate in December, she wasn't able to lie. It's a problem in our family. And she told them what she had done, and they said, "Well, you lost your citizenship. You can't leave the country anymore." In the meantime, Grandma Ilanka, she didn't know what happened to her papers, her citizenship papers. With all the moves, things get lost. And sometimes that happens a lot in the US too, where there are fires or floods or whatever, but people lose important papers. So anyway, they wouldn't let Grandma Ilanka leave either. I was the only one who they still considered a US citizen. We stayed in Debrecen until 1949, when Grandma turned 70, and they decided that they would let her leave the country on a special elderly pass. We flew to London and then took a big ship, the SS Washington, across the ocean. We didn't have staterooms. There were multiple people sharing each cabin. But I remember my grandma, she got me my first crayons and coloring book for the trip because I couldn't speak any English and couldn't talk to any of the other people there. And that was a real treat for me. And I also had a banana on the ship, and that was so delicious. When we arrived in New York, my Aunt Mugdy and her husband met us in New York City. They had gotten there a little bit before us, although they had to wait in Germany for 3 years before immigrating. And they had a son, so I had a new cousin to play with. They put us on the train. After a few days, they put us on the train for Little Falls, where my mother, Helen, was reunited with her brother. Sorry, she was not. It was Ilanka was reunited with her son. And we set in to move in with my uncle there and his children. I started school in the third grade, although I was supposed to be in the sixth grade. But they held me back because I didn't speak English very well. They moved me up to the fourth grade after a while, but they wouldn't let me go any higher. So I stayed with the younger kids the whole time. My clothes looked different than those of the American students too. I remember the teacher told my uncle to get me some American clothes because I had these long knit stockings and high top shoes, and I couldn't really change in and out of them when it was snowing. So he got me a snowsuit, and I was really proud because I could take care of that by myself. I grew up with those other kids, and we had a normal life pretty much, but I really, really missed my parents. I wasn't able to see them again for almost 10 years, until 1958. They tried to immigrate, but nobody wanted the Jews, so they were stuck in Hungary. When my father came in 1958, he was now 68 years old, and he had been a lawyer in Hungary. But here he worked as a bicycle delivery boy, riding all over Manhattan. My mother worked in a nursing home as an aide, cleaning patients up. They did anything they could to support the family. we continued to be very religious and devout and attended services regularly. We were Orthodox. And everything was fine. And then in the 1990s, we went to the Hallel prayers of Thanksgiving. And I remember I heard Ana Hashem Hoshiana, the same prayer I'd heard on the train decades before. And I cried at the flashback and just broke down. You know, the trauma from the Holocaust never leaves you. I'm going to show you a couple of slides, just a couple.
Judy, let's take
Yeah.
some appreciations
Sorry.
first, if that's okay. It's fresh. Okay, I just want you to, that's a lot to take in. Let's just take a pause. Just let all the scenes, take them in. Take a breath. Let it sit with you. Now, does anyone want to give appreciations? Who's going to be brave to give some appreciations to our lovely storyteller, Judy?
Hi, my name is Linda. I want to thank you. And I guess I want to say in terms of how I feel or how I was feeling is overwhelmed at the words of a child who has gone through things that we can't even imagine. And I appreciate you telling her story in such a beautiful way. But it is all overwhelming. I mean, the whole thing is overwhelming. How could it have happened? How did it happen? And et cetera. But in the eyes of a child, and what that child went through is just, it's almost too much to bear. But thank you.
Thank you, Linda. And you know, I didn't know her story until about 15 years ago. My family did not talk about their experiences. And it was shocking to me to learn what she had gone through.
Okay, we have another appreciation.
Thank you. My name is Ronnie, and I'm beyond impressed and beyond enthralled by what you've been saying. And what really strikes me is the way you're relating this story, this horror, in such a nonchalant manner, kind of, well, I went to the supermarket and they didn't have what I wanted, so then I went somewhere else. And that makes it almost even more captivating. And what you're telling us, unfortunately, makes me think about certain parallels to today in terms of citizenship and non-citizenship as well. But thank you so much for sharing with us.
Thank you. And yes, absolutely. I'm concerned about the parallels.
Thank you. We have one more appreciation.
Hello, this is Marie. I wanted to appreciate that even with technical difficulties, you managed to go on. I wanted to appreciate that you told this story in first person and you were able to give voice to someone who may or may not have been able to do what you did in the way that you did. And you were able to reach people who probably maybe that person could not reach. And it's carrying this story forward. And I was also felt a heavy weight on me when you were speaking. It was a little difficult to listen to, but I really appreciate you carrying that message forward.
Thank you, Marie. It's very hard to do, but I'm trying. I think it's so important, and I'm particularly trying to reach students and young people. But it's hard to be allowed into the schools where I live.
Yeah, we're going to work on that, Judy. I'm going to help you. Thank you so much. You guys those were amazing appreciations for your first time. That's a lot of people uncomfortable. Did you want to say, you want to share something?
Thank you so much. My name is Linda, and I taught Holocaust literature to non-Jewish kids in Maryland. We read the account of Elie Wiesel Night.
Mhm.
And I gave the book to the kids. It's a very short book. It's 91 pages. I gave the book to the kids on a Thursday, planning to start on Monday. By the time Monday rolled around, I had to throw out all of my lesson plans because the kids had read the whole book over the weekend. The only way the Holocaust is an affirmative there, it's an idea, but personalizing it the way you do makes it real to people from everywhere, all walks of life. And I just have to tell you that it made a huge difference in my teaching to have the first person rendition of what happened. And I thank you.
Thank you. I'm really glad that you had the opportunity to do that and were allowed to do that. Montgomery County?
I didn't teach most of the students.
What was the name of the county? Do you remember?
It's okay.
Annapolis. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much, everybody. That was really good. Good job on the appreciations. Judy,
Thank
do you
for
want
your
to
kind
share?
words.
Do you want to share the picture of
Right.
Mari?
Um, so this is what they looked like after liberation. So here she's already 7 or 8 years old. So you can imagine what a tiny little thing she was when she was 5 and in Lobau. This is Jacob or Yakush, my great uncle, her father, who is a lawyer, her mother Helen, and her grandmother. So I wanted you to see what they looked like after liberation, and then how they looked when they were reunited. Look how striking that 9 years difference is, 10 years, almost 10 years, and how old Yakush is in particular, how worn he looks. And can you imagine him riding around on a bicycle, riding around Manhattan to support his family? I mean, it's just mind-boggling to me that he was able to do that.
It definitely is. Okay, we're going to move into the interview part. And there's some copies of Resilience, and it's just beautifully written. Such a beautiful, just to honor your family. And I have so much respect for the work that you put into it. So my first question is, what inspired you to write this book?
Well, actually, what happened, you'll be surprised. It started with my daughter preparing for her bat mitzvah when she was, 12 going on 13. And she interviewed another cousin we were close to. And I didn't know Archie's story. It turns out he was 15 when he was in a camp. And he ended up the sole survivor in his family. He watched his father be murdered in front of him. And his 2 little siblings were gassed. And then after he was liberated, he went to Palestine. And again, he was one of the, I think, 3 soldiers in his unit that survived the war for independence there. So I learned a lot, and that's what opened up my family talking a little bit more about the Holocaust. My father's brother was really into family history, and he started to as I got older, he started to let me interview him. And my mother didn't until late in her life. She really was very closed-mouthed about it. But then it was important to her. And as I said in the beginning of the book, when she was in the hospital dying, she said, sit down and take out your computer and start typing, because I know you won't remember all of this. And it suddenly became very, very important to her that I record the family history and share. So I ended up doing, as a promise to my mother and Uncle Shani, doing this, ended up with about 100 hours, maybe a little bit more, of oral history interviews with 9 survivors and 8 of their children. The other thing that prompted my writing the book was the divisiveness and othering that I saw with the 2016 election. And we know how that has gone. And then finally, the baby sister in the family, Kati, was turning 95. And so I raced to finish the book before her 95th birthday as a present to her.
Wow. And I'm so glad that your mother realized the importance of telling you the story and you got that firsthand account from her while she was still alive. So important. My next question is, what did it feel like to build this story and what effect did it have on you?
Um, it was a huge responsibility, and I still feel that weight of the responsibility. There was tremendous stress in doing it, which was made worse by the rush to get it finished for Kati. I read a lot, I researched a lot. I heard horrible stories from my one aunt. There are only a couple of bad chapters or tough chapters in the book. The one about Brigitte in the war and in Auschwitz, and the one about Miklos on the Eastern Front. And those were horrible to listen to. And I still have nightmares when I do these talks and when I read about it. The other thing that may surprise you that was hard for me was I'm a medical and science writer, as well as a physician, and I didn't know how to write a story. So I actually had to really struggled to learn how to write narrative and try to write a compelling story. And I did that by reading other writers and by actually hiring two women to help me learn to write better.
Wow. You put so much thought and effort into all the steps of writing this. What resources did you find helpful in researching your family, just for anybody that might want to research their family as well?
There's a program called Scrivener, which I would encourage anybody who writes. I still use that for all of my writing for Forbes, because it allows you to sort things, ideas on like index cards, and resort them very easily. I struggled at first.
How do you spell that?
Scrivener,
Scrivener. Okay.
Scrivener. And
Scrivener.
last time I looked, it was $40 and a month free trial. And it's absolutely wonderful. You can cut and paste and move things around. Um, I used the LDS Family Search. Is a treasure trove. In fact, I recently found Onyekave, which is a birth record, newborn birth registry. I just found for my mother, and when I wrote the book a few years ago, that wasn't available. So they're getting new records all the time. But the LDS Family Search was easier to use. You should pardon my saying so than Jewish Gen. I read a lot of other descriptive books. For Hungary, there was a book called Journey to Voya, and the author of that is actually one of the people I hired. But it gave me a flavor for what life was like and what her description of things. So it taught me to pay attention to pictures. For example, if you have family photos, look at the details of what kind of fabric it might have been or what colors there were. When I went back to Hungary, I took pictures of some of the buildings. One of my neighbors was my mother's neighbors there. Her house was the original one, and they had walls that are like this thick. And I learned that was for insulation, and along with a thatched roof. So you pick up details like that. And then there was a book called Why, Explaining the Holocaust by Peter Hayes, which was really excellent too. One of the things, going back for a minute, Jenna, that if people go to do this, that I hadn't anticipated is the unhappiness that writing the book created in the family. So it really, you should be aware of
Yeah.
that. It really
You
created.
told me some of the stories. Yeah. That's so sad that happened. She's frozen. She froze.
I froze.
He's back. You froze for a little bit.
Okay.
Okay, last question. Can you talk about the people you met when you went back to Hungary? Some that helped your family and others that weren't so helpful.
There were a variety of people, and I'm going to go back to screen share. See if I can do it more smoothly. Share. Okay. Is that working? We're back to Mari's family.
Yeah.
So in 1977, I told you that my mother had a brother that was blown up on in Ukraine, blown up on the Eastern Front by a landmine. In 1977, we got a letter from this young man, Yoshka, who was the illegitimate son of the brother that had died. And my mother hadn't known anything about him. And it was a bizarre story, but basically a villager recognized him, saw him on the street in a nearby town and said, you must be an Ehrenfeld. Your face, your high forehead and eyes, that's an Ehrenfeld. And so he was able to get in touch with my family, and we went back in 1978 to visit him. These are pictures of my grandfather, who was murdered on arrival in Auschwitz, despite having been a decorated World War I veteran and very well respected in his town, very prominent man in his little village. So when we went back to Hungary, I went to my mother's village, and this is one of the people that I met, and I was shocked. And as I said, I speak household Hungarian, so I understood what he was saying. And this man, Erdős István, he talked about my grandfather extending credit to all the villagers and how generous he was, and how he gave the kids penny candy. And then he boasted about deporting my grandfather and putting him in a wagon to leave town. And I was stunned. I mean, it was mind-boggling to me that he was telling me this very nonchalantly, talking about my grandfather. And I asked Yoshka, I said, did he say did I understand what he really said? And they said, yep, that was it. So that was probably the worst thing that happened when I was there. There were really good people too. Okay, this was Kati, the baby in the family. She was 18 when she was sent to Auschwitz. This was another neighbor of theirs, Tot Mihai, and he lived across the little dirt road. He lived in a shack across the dirt road. And Kati was, before she was deported, when they were on house arrest, she was afraid of being raped by the soldiers. And so while it was illegal for her to leave her house, every night she snuck across the lane and went to Totbachi's house, that's Uncle Tot, and she slept on the dirt floor under his bed with the chickens running around her. And he protected her every night, even though he would have been murdered, arrested and murdered had he been discovered to be doing that. So that was just incredible. And we were able to get him listed in Yad Vashem's Righteous Gentiles. This woman here, Lushonsi Betty or Brigitte, is the Hungarian name. My mother asked me to look for her when we were in Hungary, and she didn't have an address. So I walked all over her old neighborhood in Debrecen, knocking on doors saying, does anybody know this woman? There were 12 kids. Surely somebody must know the family. And we turned her up. And I met her and I thought, I didn't know my mother's story at this point, okay? I said, to myself, I'm wondering, why did my mother want me to track down this woman? She just looks like, a matronly older lady. What's the big deal? And then later I learned that Brigitte had offered her own identification card to Kati so that Kati could pass as Gentile. She had brought my mother food in the ghetto. And all the pictures that we have are because Brigitte stored the pictures and a few pieces of jewelry under the thatched roof in her house in Debrecen. So it's just astonishing, how you don't know what's happening with people. These are some of the other people who helped save my mother and the other sisters' lives in various ways. So I won't go into all the detail. They're all in the book. This is a picture that that Loshency Bregi saved under her roof. This is Clary, the middle sister, with a petty point. Can you imagine how many years it took for her to needlepoint this petty point? And this is in their parents' bedroom in Sharand. And then when I went back to Hungary again in 2008, Yoshka's son, who is now gone, helped me buy the original needlepoint from the man who had it. So that's now in my home in Cumberland. These are the sisters, Betty, Kati, my mother, Magda, and Clary, who you saw before. And these are the sisters in the same order at my wedding in 1984 in Cumberland, Maryland, along with the brother Miklos, my father's brother, and this woman, Ella, who was one of the women who helped save my mother's life in Auschwitz, who later married her brother. So it was quite remarkable to see them all together. The only person not there is my father, who died when he was 50 and I was 12. And that was the final crushing blow for my mother. I wanted to show you this. You know the book. There's my website. Here's my email if you all have any questions and want to write me. By the way, Jenna didn't mention, but if you have friends, all of the profits, every penny from the book goes to Holocaust education, particularly Teach the Shoah Now. And then before Jenna goes to your project, I want to show you this couple who we met again in 1978 when we went back. They invited us for lunch at their house. These were really good neighbors, my mother thought. And we were having lunch, and suddenly Kunjiga and Esti rips this tablecloth off the table and says, "Oh, Magda, this was yours. You made this. I shouldn't have it on the table. Here, you take it." And my mother knew that it wasn't hers. It must have been one of her sisters who made this eyelet tablecloth, because she had torn hers up when she was in the ghetto. All the hours of work in this tablecloth that was for her hope chest, she had torn up to make diapers for her baby, who then died when he was only 2 weeks old. The other thing we later learned, and we didn't know when we visited Sharand, is that Kunjiga had seen my grandfather burying their valuables. They had a general store, and he had buried some watches and jewelry and fine fabrics in his yard in Sharand. And Kunjiga had seen him. Their house was kind of catty corner to my grandfather's. He'd seen him do that, and he went back over and dug everything up and stole everything. And when we were there, they said, "Oh, if you want to see your bedroom, your parents' bedroom furniture, so and so has that, and this other person has that, and the vineyard that you had, another person has." It was really horrifying. I mean, they were very nonchalant about it. And oops, this is the tablecloth that each of the girls in the family made a hope chest. Worked for years doing this kind of embroidery and needlework. And now I will turn it back over to Jenna.
Thank you so much, Judy. It's so special that you were able to connect with these people and recover some family heirlooms and now have them for future
Right.
generations in your family. You're so incredibly lucky. All right, so we're gonna do our last activity. So you all have your cards. Does anyone want to share the image that they built? based off of either an heirloom or a specific time in your family? Right.
I remember being in my grandparents' house in New York City in their apartment with my father and mother and brother and my aunt and uncle. My grandparents and my parents were survivors, and we were in their condo, our apartment, and it was Passover. And I remember having Elijah's cup, this heavy glass. I still have it, little goblet that is like very thick glass that they use for Elijah's cup. And I remember sitting at the Seder table, always watching when they opened the door up to see whether the wine would go down in that cup. And we still use that cup in our house. And I also had these little tiny glass mugs that they used to put the wine in for the children, me and my brother. And I still have those cups also. So my memory of it is just being a small apartment, smells of food, people being happy and joyous together. And my grandparents were very religious. We had pillows behind our chairs, so we were very soft and comfortable. And the delicious food and family time.
Beautiful job. Beautiful job. I was there with you. Yeah. And that's what you want to do when you're building a story. You want to go back to that moment. That was beautiful. Who's next? Roz. All right.
I wish I had a story to share. Perhaps I have many that is personal to me, but I do want to briefly share one since your stories originate in Hungary of the great-grandfather of our daughter-in-law, Sarah Lewis Levy. And you may have heard this story. Her great-grandfather, his retirement years after being a very holy man, a ritual slaughterer, and a number of other things in Budapest, began to create artwork and to write documents. And the principal thing he wrote, for which he's now rather famous, was a sukkah liner. We have a copy of it here in our congregation because when our son Steve married his wife Sarah and heard this story, he hired a professional photographer to go to the Museum of Jewish Heritage in Lower Manhattan, which is where this resides, a very complicated multi-year voyage, and take photos of it. And with the permission of the museum, they did this. And Steve made 2 copies, one for his wife Sarah's parents and one for us to give to the, because it coincided with the time that club built a permanent sukkah outside of the social hall, which sadly no longer exists. But every year since it's been here, it's been put up, whether we have a permanent sukkah or not. 24 feet long. It has all of the blessings that one says at the time of Sukkot. It's illustrated in the most beautiful way, what you might call a naive style, based on the way things looked in Budapest in the 1920s and 30s. I just looked it up and I sent a copy to Rebecca Jefferson of an article about it from the museum site so that she'll know about it. And maybe she has a book in the Library of Judaica about it. We have a book, which is very precious. So fast forward, I've known this story since Sarah and Steve have married, which was about 22, 23 years ago. Fast forward about 3 weeks ago in the New York Times, which no longer have a daily newspaper that I can get paper form. This is one of the sources of my information. There's a story by a writer who I know, and her name is, let me see if I can get this right. She wrote Fleischman is in Trouble, which some of you may have read or seen, and most recently, Long Island Compromise, which it's a little hot. I've read half of it, but not all of it. Her name is Taffy Brodesh. I'll have to look up her name. Anyway, it's about her childhood friend's father, who always was asking her when she was a young girl, before she was a journalist and author, to write his story. And for whatever reason, she never either got to it or had the desire to get to it. She has done that recently, and that's the article that I saw in the New York Times. And it is about the family who smuggled the Sukkah liner from Budapest in the late 1950s to the United States, kept it rolled up in their house in the area. And when the museum was opened, someone knew about it and contacted them to see if they would either gift it or put it on extended loan. And it's the latter that they did, to the Museum of Jewish Heritage. In my mind, not only is it an amazing story, but this idea of, I call it a fugue, how things keep coming around and intersecting, often at the times that you least expect those things to happen. You've touched upon some of them when you talked about your return trip to Hungary, and that really touched me.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you very
Roz.
much.
I'm glad that I know the meaning behind what's in the sukkah, because I didn't know that. Does anyone else want to share?
It's interesting. Hi. Thank you, Judy. I'm Linda.
Thank you.
And what you spoke about was very, very moving. It's interesting how it sounds like a lot of us have Passover memories. My great grandmother, my father's grandparents, lived in Crown Heights in Brooklyn, and they were both American born and bred, and the family all lived on the same street in Crown Heights, and they ran a shoe store. And every year they had a Passover Seder in the back room of the shoe store. And I have two of the pictures from probably the mid 40s of Pesach Seder at the shoe store. Flash forward, when I was a child, my grandparents, my father's parents, had a 1-bedroom apartment in Lower Manhattan. And you'd walk in, and for any of you that have been to old Manhattan apartments, it was one long room, the dining room to the living room. And then they had 1 bedroom and a bathroom on one side and a kitchen on the other. And I always equated the Seder with the pictures from the shoe store, because you'd walk in and there would be this one long table, and the kids were always right near the door with the women, and my grandfather and my uncles and the older cousins were sitting at the front leading the Seder. And as kids, if we wanted to get from one side to the other, we just crawled under the table because it was impossible to really walk around. And there was a smell that we always encountered when we walked in, which was my grandmother's fricassee. And that kind of set the tone for the annual family Cohen Leppelstadt, because that's what my grandmother was, a Leppelstadt Seder. And now the two pictures of the 1940s Seders hang in my wall. And it just brings back memories when I look at them of what was, which I wasn't around for, but then my memories of what I had growing up in the 60s and 70s.
I love how you spoke about the scent and how that, because I feel like there's certain scents that bring back memories for all of us. That was so beautiful. Anyone else? Okay, Linda?
Okay, let me try to make this brief. I grew up in Brooklyn. My father grew up in Pittsburgh. Every year, whenever spring break was, I guess it was probably Easter week was spring break, we would drive to Pittsburgh to see the family once a year. My grandmother was there, aunts, uncles, cousins, and so on. And when it coincided with Pesach, there would be a Seder at my Aunt Irene's house. Now, my Aunt Irene was the eldest. She was 15 years older than my dad and the elder of the family. And they were the very wealthy conservative part of the family. And my Aunt Irene was very prim and proper. And I picture her table, a long table with beautiful tablecloth. And she actually embroidered the tablecloth with 14 napkins for me when I was a little girl that I still have and use. So I picture this very prim, proper, perfect, beautiful Passover table. And when my Aunt Irene would be in the kitchen, my other aunt's husband, Uncle Milton, if there were peas on the table, he would take the peas and hang them across the table just to be silly and show Aunt Irene, well, we're not so prim and proper, Aunt Irene. So it's just this memory I have as a little girl, which was many, many decades ago, of my Uncle Milton being silly and hanging peas across Aunt Irene's beautiful Passover table. So I thought a little levity would be appropriate.
I love that. And if you do a story, you're going to do that in your story. Yeah.
I have one plate. It's a serving bowl of my grandmother's Passover dishes. And every time I look at it, all of those wonderful memories and feelings are there. And Passover has always been my favorite holiday until lately because there's nobody left, you know? But I still have all of those wonderful memories. And that plate brings it all back every day because I see it every day.
So much. I miss that generation.
Oh.
Your parents. They were the greatest. Okay, I'm gonna get it together. Let's all give Judy a round of applause. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your story, Judy.
And thank you all for your attention and for your stories too. I can really relate to what you're talking about in those memories.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And I hope you have safe travels. I know you're leaving tomorrow, and I'll see you on Zoom, hopefully, for some Teach the Shoah and maybe in person one day, I hope.
Thank you for setting this up.
So much.
And thank you, Philip.
Thanks, everyone. I hope this encouraged you to build your family stories and pass on those traditions to the future generations. It's what makes us so strong and resilient as a people. So thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day.